World War II was responsible for the murder of millions throughout the world. A lesser known fact is that it's also responsible for the creation of thousands of serial killers. Fritz Honka Jr. as a child survived the war only to grow up to become Germany's worst nightmare at the time. Let's find out why and how these victims were mutilated because of him. Over the course of 5 years, several sex workers were found chopped up into little pieces and hidden inside of his apartment. This channel is about lesser known serial killers. If you're interested, I upload new content every Tuesday and Thursday. Well, if you're ready, let's get started. 1835, in the country of Germany, a married couple by the name of Fritz and Alice Honka birthed 10 children together. Now that's a lot of damn kids. They lived decent middle-class lives. Fritz is a steam engine operator and she is a house cleaner. Together brought home a good combined salary. Prior to the impending storm called World War II, they lived a happy life together. That was about to change the dynamics of their entire family. A few short years later, war happened. The German authorities had taken Fritz Sr. custody for having some type of relationship with communists. Fritz's relationship with communists may not be true because this was a general label placed on anyone considered as undesirable or a nonconformist by the Third Reich. Eventually, the government compiled enough excuses to arrest the entire family and place them all into separate concentration camps. I'm going to bypass some of the atrocities that the family endured in these camps because most people have a general idea of what took place in them. Several years later, the Russian army liberated the entire family, but not without their deep emotional and physical scars stemming from the treatment administered by their captors. For instance, Fritz Sr., who loved his children and wife dearly, was alleged to have become an alcoholic in order to live with the debilitating injuries from the torture he endured as a captive. Alice, now left alone with 10 children to raise and nurture, was no longer an appealing thought to her. Alice had her own emotional traumas from the concentration camp. She unconsciously took out her frustrations on her children. So each family member was left with similar emotional, physical injuries, and each had to find their own way of dealing with them while fitting back into society. This brings us to Fritz Jr., the killer in waiting. He was impacted more heavily by his father's death due to the close connection they shared. Fritz, for obvious reasons, wanted revenge against all the Germans who had destroyed him and his family's life. Most of the people that he sought revenge after were taken prisoner by the German army. Now left with no outlet, Fritz Jr. became a troubled child, and he was alleged to have become very confrontational towards others. His mother immediately placed him into a children's home. Get out. Now feeling abandoned by his mother, his hatred for revenge grew and focused on her. This is when he allegedly began to openly discuss his hatred for all women, and they all need to die. Fritz became a womanizer. After beating them as if they were okay with it, he would have children with them, then eventually he would become disgusted with the whole relationship, and Fritz would leave them to fend for themselves. Except for Irmgard Albrecht. She was special. Irmgard was a woman he met that he was able to beat her into submission. Her obedience pleased him, so he managed to manipulate her into helping him assault a woman by the name of Ruth Duffner. Ruth was a sex worker that was a friend of Irmgard and Fritz. They both persuaded her to come to their apartment and eat and drink and have fun. When Ruth arrived, Fritz immediately began to discuss having intimacy with her. Fritz told Ruth that she wasn't deserving of any pay for intimacy, so Fritz attempted to force himself on her as Irmgard watched. Ruth managed to escape and notify the authorities. Irmgard and Fritz were arrested but not charged with any crime and only given a fine. Fritz and Irmgard split and he found his own apartment. In 1970, Fritz managed to persuade a woman by the name of Gertrude Breyer to come to his apartment for a fee to perform her services. Fritz was alleged to have told her that she was not worthy of being paid for services by him. I am the lover man, and you should be thankful. I'm sure Gertrude looked at him as if he had two heads, and after telling him where he should go, she attempted to leave the apartment, and that's when Fritz came up behind her and strangled her to death. While the deceased body was still warm, he assaulted it. Now that's damn disgusting. When Fritz was done, he realized that he needed to get rid of this body. So he cut up the body into small pieces and then placed them in individual bags. He then took those individual bags and discarded them in various places throughout the city. The bags were located, but unfortunately the authorities had no witnesses or leads. Fritz felt empowered after the killing of Gertrude and immediately wanted to continue, but the fear of being apprehended caused caused him to take a 4-year hiatus. In 1974, Fritz encountered another sex worker by the name of Anna Bruscho. He also persuaded her to come to his house so that she could perform her services. Anna responded and had intimacy with Fritz. Afterwards, he became so enraged with Anna. After seeing his change in attitude, she became uncomfortable in his presence. Anna attempted to speak with him in a sweet and calming manner in order to disarm him from turning on her. The problem was that Fritz wanted her to show him passion during the act of intimacy. She probably would have appeased him because sex workers are willing to role play for their clients. Unfortunately, Fritz did not want to tell her this little secret because it would not have felt natural to him. As Anna began to put on her clothing, Fritz strangled her to death. With the hacksaw, Fritz then began to cut the body up into small pieces, then placed them in bags. Afterwards, Fritz hid the body in the attic of the building in which he lived in. Within the next year, Fritz murdered 2 additional women during separate incidents in the same manner. He would persuade them both to come to his apartment to get paid for their work services. After each encounter, they were strangled to death, then their bodies were cut up and placed in bags. Those bags were hidden in the attic of his apartment. The neighbors in the building complained about the stench of rotting meat throughout the house. The neighbors couldn't hold their breath long enough or stop coughing due to the noxious smell. Fritz tried to cover up the smell by purchasing dozens of air fresheners, but this did not work. He was like, "What the hell are they bitching about? It's not that bad." One day while Fritz was at work, the apartment building caught on fire. The fire department responded and found one of Fritz's bags containing a human torso in the apartment. The police were notified and the house was searched. All 3 bodies of the missing women were located and identified. Fritz was immediately arrested at his job and taken to the police department for an interview. He confessed to all 4 murders. Eventually, he was found guilty of 4 homicides of female sex workers. Fritz was placed in a psychiatric hospital and given a 15-year prison sentence. 15 years later, he was released and died in 1998. If you're interested in more stories such as these, click on one of the suggested videos above. God bless and stay safe.